Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Centric. This being a show we talk about TV shows that are crime dramas. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the series premiere of Obituary. Great series premiere. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So I went into this knowing the premise. I watched the trailer. I don't remember if I saw all of it, but I think I saw enough to get the gist of what this series was about. And obviously, we get introduced to our main protagonist, Elvira, and her interesting circumstances. It definitely gives me Dexter vibes in just some of what her upbringing is, and just kind of how, whether that's fully what kind of made her the way she is, that she was always a little off. The fact of the matter is, her mom died in childbirth, and she never was really happy. For her, the first time she was ever really happy is when she was shooting a gun with her dad because he was teaching her how to shoot one, and she ended up killing a deer. And she's like, my dad saw me happy, genuinely happy for the first time in my life. And I guess he didn't really think too much of it at the time, but she was in these spirals of depression. So she was on heavy medication, but she got off the medication because it made her feel like, she says, like a zombie, like she was sleepwalking through life. And we do cut back to this scene where her dad is, we cut back to it later on, like near the end of the episode, where her dad found her in her car, like pills beside her and everything, like seemingly like she tried to kill herself by overdosing on her meds. Because even her dad's like, says this interesting thing later on, because we find out he drowns himself in the drink, and he's like, you probably don't know why I do that. And I'm kind of, he purposely makes it so she doesn't know. Either she doesn't remember that, or she does and she doesn't correlate him drinking with that. It seems like that's connected, considering later on he like was having a nightmare about that night because he thought he lost her. Understandable, like your daughter is the only person you got left in this world. You lost your wife years ago, and the only piece of her that's left is your daughter. That's the only connection you have to your wife. So if she's gone, you're worried about her, you love her. And obviously Elvira's in this position where she does so much to take care of her dad, and it's that, I think it's that, I don't even know if catch 22 of it would be this, because he doesn't really take care of himself, because maybe on some level it's an excuse to keep her around, because it's like, if I don't have a reason to keep you around, you might go out there, and I want to keep you close. Because she even recognizes, like, my dad doesn't want me to go anywhere, like, oh, he wants me to have like a job or whatever that will keep me nearby. So because she's like, you don't have any money without me. My income is the only thing kind of sustaining both of us and making sure that you get treated as well, that you're okay. So, but I don't know, like, outside of they might have talked about it, I'm just not remembering. I don't think her dad is actually sick, is he? I think it's just he drinks a lot, but maybe he actually is sick too, because she talks about taking care of him, but I'm not sure if that's just an excuse to cover up the fact is he drinks a lot, which it seems like people in town, they both have reputations, because Elvira's always been a little off ever since she was a kid, and people have kind of picked up on that. Only other person that really has stuck around her is her best friend Mallory, or Mal. But either way, getting into Elvira's situation of, she writes obituaries because she found this place, because for her, writing was the only kind of escape she had in life, and now she gets paid to do that. Granted, she's doing it about dead people, but if I think for her, who's had this kind of fascination with death, you mix that in with her ability to write, and she found this perfect balance to do what she loves, while also being able to kind of connect that with something that she is fascinated by, that being death. And for her, she looks at it as a means of, I kind of give a second life to someone else, because she even says it later on, she describes it as, I tell two sentences about someone's death, and the rest of the obituary is about celebrating their life. Granted, home dude, I think his name is Tom, turned her down for, like, she got a tip for writing an obituary ahead of time, but it wasn't that good. So the dude's mom was like, yeah, because it was about her husband, which I even love that she's like, wow, the mortician did a better job of making this guy look alive than my words. And so they took back the tip because they weren't satisfied. Even her boss got chewed out by the mom slash wife being like, oh, like, you didn't do a good enough job with this obituary for my husband. So now that's being reflected on her. So now she's not getting the pay increase she's kind of hoping for, and so she has to wait around for people to die because that's the only way she's going to be able to, you know. She lives in a small town regardless, and even she's like, yeah, like people, right, the whole point was she was no longer going to be salary. It's almost basically going to be by commission is how she was going to make any money going forward. And for her, it's like, people die in this town like once every 10 days, and my money's already short, and you're asking me to kind of take even less money in that regard. So her thought process behind this was actually inspiration from her dad, that she would write people's obituaries in advance. She kind of uses a reference of like, oh yeah, like people who wrote like these obituary type of articles about Michael Jackson, and they kind of posted them like the moment he died, which I was like, I'm sure that does happen. There are some that are written ahead of time, ready to. It's a weird example to make. Wasn't there like a thing celebrating Betty White's 100th birthday? Sadly, she died like a little before her 100th birthday. So I want to say something like that happened, where like someone's article had to go went up celebrating. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm making that up, and maybe that was like a dark joke somebody made or something like that. But I'm sure that does happen, where stuff is like, yeah, we'll keep this on standby in case this person dies, just on the off chance. I mean, that's how you sadly get to that, which is very morbid, obviously, but her taking that, and her specifically not aiming. I think it's so interesting because, once again, I went into this knowing the premise of she's going to start killing people as a means of doing her job. I didn't know what her guidelines were going to be, so I was like, that's even more so. I'm like, well, she's not going to be Dexter, is she? Because Dexter, at least he had Harry's rules to be like, yeah, only kill bad people, which didn't always end up being the case. You know, that part of that story. But either way, I didn't know what her guidelines were going to be, so I initially thought she was going to straight up kill people, but she doesn't. She picks people who are about to die or in the process of dying, get to know their story, write up their like eulogy in advance, and get it ready to immediately go out. Because that way you get to know the person before the end. Like, she ends up meeting that woman Alice and pretended to be her daughter Rose, just because she's older and a little out of it. And being like, oh yeah, you need to lose. Oh, I'm glad to see you lost some weight, but you also need to put some like makeup on your, like, because kind of saying like her skin's a little too pale or something like that. And so she writes it, but her boss Huey is like, yeah, but it's not good enough. Leave that part off at the end, referencing like, oh, you're not this well-known literature writer. Like, oh, you're not Hemingway, yada yada, so on and so forth. I love that he did it once and then he did it twice. I'm like, are you just gonna go through the long list of famous writers in history, just saying who she isn't? Because she tried it over and over again. There was a guy that was on ladders, and it was a whole statistic thing, and ultimately he ended up dying. So she's benefiting from this, but it's just she's kind of having to go back to drawing board because she can't quite find her voice. And then her final, I don't remember the guy's name, but he's the dude that had like cancer, like stage 4 cancer. She's like, oh, it's only a matter of time. And then almost 2 weeks go by, still alive. And then she's just out there running into him every day. He's like, oh, it's a beautiful day, isn't it? And just every day running into him just pisses her off more and more, because it means like she can't get paid for this particular obituary. I guess no one else at that time was sick because she wasn't writing any other ones. This was kind of her only one. I'm not saying that like this was supposed to be her grand magnum opus or anything like that, but it's like, right, this is the only one I have now because no one else I'm looking through in town is sick enough to be on death's door like this guy is. It's only any day now, but it's like every day he's still alive. And one day she just finally got annoyed with him and kind of ignored him and didn't take her headphones off. And he's like, oh, it's a beautiful day, isn't it? She's like, what's so great about it? And so it ends up in this kind of shoving match because he ended up throwing her headphones off the cliff. She ends up pushing him, but then she saves him, because I'm thinking like, okay, you're holding on to him, you're going to let him go and he's going to be your first victim. But it's like, no, you saved him. It's like, oh, but now he's going to report you to the guard or the police. And then he starts being a complete and utter asshole by rattling off like, oh, you're this person, everyone's laughing behind your back, your dad is a drunk rat too unfit to be a father, and you, yada, 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 so on and so forth. The only good person was your mom, and she was a good pipe. which I never heard that phrasing before. Excuse my ignorance, but I'm assuming that's kind of, I interpret it as like, oh, she was a beautiful lass. Like, I don't know if that was just meant to be like, oh, she was beautiful in just spirit and just a good natured person and everyone liked her, or just more like a, oh, she's sexy and she could get it type of situation. I interpret it as the latter, but it could just as easily be the former. But yeah, that was enough for her, and she pushed him and he died. Her justification, at the very least, she was like, well, the guy was a dick anyway, plus he's going to die in a couple months anyway, so it's not that bad. But then she finds out when she's talking to his wife that the whole thing was a lie. He actually went into remission a couple years ago, and he just loved the attention so much that they kept it quiet. So it's like, oh, cool, 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 cool. So I killed a man who I thought only had a couple months to live. In actuality, he had a couple years. But there was also this aspect of, but I did kill someone who was a douchebag. So it's like, did he like deserve to die? Like, I mean, yes, he was a dick, and yes, he was lying just for attention. I don't think he deserved to die. But I don't think there was anything else douchey about him other than those two factors. So I don't know if there was like, but she was saying like, oh yeah, he deserved to die. I'm like, I guess, I mean, yes, he was just a shitty person and mean and, yada, 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 so on and so forth, but still. And she actually can't even publish the obituary. Her boss won't take it because because the body was never recovered, she still wants to believe her husband's alive. So she's going to stretch out that, I guess there's this 7-year time wait of like, after 7 years, someone is officially declared dead. So it can't be like, at least in that time frame. There's just, I don't know if that's maybe that's just specifically an Ireland thing, or maybe that is just a general across the world thing. I don't know if I've ever heard that before. Just like, yeah, you get to like keep the death from being at the very least official for 7 years, but after 7 years of the person being gone, it has to be made official. So she can't publish her obituary, making it so that she doesn't get paid for it. And she was counting on this, especially because for her, it's like, oh, I put in good work. I know this is good, and you're telling me I can't even put it out there. So. And then it's not until she runs into Sylvester with her dad that she's like, hey, he's a dick bag in this town. Cool, let me go full Dexter now and actually purposely kill people that are bad. That would be my guidelines. And it turns out that Sylvester is connected to Mal, which I'm like, at first I was like, is Mal a lady of the night? Doesn't seem like it's the case. It's just like, hey, this is our hookup spot, because he is married, I believed. Or at least he has because he has a family and stuff. So it's just meant to be like she's a side situation. He's not a good guy, but it is the type of situation of, hey, at least he's good to me. Like, he's nice enough, and that's fine. Yeah, he might have a temper, so on and so forth, but I'll accept all bad just for the little bit of good. It's kind of the justification Mal kind of gives, even though Elvira's kind of like, no, you should be like a little more aiming for a little bit more. But I think they're both kind of pariahs in their own way, in their own ways in the town. And so interesting too, because they both bonded over like parents' deaths. I think specifically their moms. I think definitely, and obviously in Elvira's case, but I believe the same thing was in Mal's case as well. Then you got the introduction to Clive, who's taking Emerson, who's taking over for Clive because Clive got let go because he I forgot what the specific job is called, but basically it revolves around writing up reports, journalistic wise and stuff about unsolved murders. And there's one in particular, a woman named Maria. She was a German that was killed here. I mean, I say here, it's in Ireland, in the confines of the show, and it's been unsolved for the past 5 years, and it's for Clive, that case that you just can't let go. And I wasn't expecting the interesting development where we find out Emerson was brought in by Clive, because it's like, well, I was going to either kind of have to go freelance or just kind of let go. So I was like, screw it. So Clive was supposed to take the job. It's like, right, you do this, you help me solve all of this, you put this into place for me, I'll give you all the money. I'm like, I guess maybe life insurance money, Because he was saying there was some kind of money situation. He's like, rather than it being split 50-50, I'll give you everything. Because if you do this, you'll be able to kind of be on film and there'll be book deals. I even love him being like, Netflix? And Clive's like, I was thinking more Sky, but sure, whatever. Which was like ironic in so many different levels. I don't know where this airs internationally. Obviously, here in I have no. It airs on Hulu, so that's just like extra funny because it's like, oh, you're aiming for one particular streaming service, and because Sky's kind of like a European streaming service, isn't it? Maybe it's an actual. I think it's a channel and a streaming server, or maybe it's just a streaming service in general. I want to say it's specific. It's specific to Europe and as a whole. I don't think it's UK specific. I think it's Europe as a whole, but I could be mistaken. I did think it's so interesting that Elvira was so ready. I was like, all right, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to make sure I don't get caught. So she got very methodical about it. She ended up, because Mal tells her everything, she ended up finding out that, hey, Sylvester has epilepsy and he almost died while they were doing their thing because he didn't take his medication. So she ended up finding out the brand of medication, ended up switching out his meds for hers just to kind of make him very like susceptible to his epilepsy. And she had set up these phones and tablets in her trunk. She was going to knock him out, put him in the trunk, activate all the screens, all the flashing, cause his epilepsy to kick in for him to have a seizure. And she was also going to like she had a knife in the back too, so I don't know if it was just right. I guess that was supposed to be the backup plan or whatever, because I was like, the whole point was so he would have a seizure, wouldn't it? So, because the whole point is any deaths, you have to make them look like natural deaths, accidents, or suicides type of situation. So, like, the knife was in the back, but I guess that was going to be her plan B in case it didn't work. But once again, the whole point is not for it to look like a murder. So, I don't fully know what she was going to do with the knife. Not unless it was supposed to be a thing of, oh, I'm going to use the knife to, like, kidnap him and then put him in the trunk and activate, which sounds so wild to say. Using the term activate in that regard, it's still applicable, but it feels nasty to use the term activate when referencing his epilepsy kicking in. So, but she had this all planned out, and she was going out with Emerson because they kind of hit it off. But then it turns out Mal shows up. It's like, oh, because I don't. It seemed like Emerson's really into Elvira, but obviously him and Mao happen to run into each other. Elvira just never admitted it to Mao how she felt, because it's like, wait, you don't like him, do you? And she's like, no. Say, okay, good, because you were right. You told me like I need to find someone good in my life, and I happen to bump into someone good. So she was looking at this opportunity, and which is kind of a bummer. Like, Mao should have been. I mean, it's asking a person a lot to kind of read in between the lines of like, right, you literally just said you didn't like him. If you would have, I don't know if she felt too awkward admitting that she liked him, or was it more so a situation of, right, she knows it's kind of good for Mal, and you just kind of want her to have something good. Maybe she felt like that there's something wrong about this person that Mal obviously likes, and she doesn't have a lot of good guys in her life, that maybe it just feels a little wrong to kind of take that from her, especially when you're the one that put it in her. You were gassing her up early in the episode, saying, hey, you deserve something better, and now that she's going for something better, who am I to kind of take that away from her, even though you can tell she is miffed about it. So it was interesting too, because Emerson ended up telling that story about his cousin, which I thought was so interesting. And Elvira being like, oh, was it pool, river, sea? And it's like, oh, it was a sea. Like his 6-year-old cousin had drowned when he was 9. Went to the funeral. The mom had dressed the dead cousin up, as well as that cousin's twin, in exact clothes. So when they put the casket in the ground, he ended up running into the alive twin, and it scared the shit out of him. And for him, that was kind of his introduction to all of this, his steps into this world. So, and there was this whole thing, like, Elvira the entire time is telling a story. She's like, there's like, what, 14 or it was like, I think she said he was like 14 or 17, something like that. Different ways to say love in Latin, but she's like, there's not a word strong enough to describe how turned on I'm right now. I'm like, Jesus. I don't know if it's just because she felt like she found a kindred spirit or just kind of got turned on by the story or kind of an amalgamation of both, whatever the case may be. She does her thing, kind of puts all that aside because she sees this as an opportunity to go after Sylvester. So she does. She did do the smart thing of deleting the text. Granted, nothing ever is completely gone, so those text messages can't always be brought up again by your provider. Like, you could get those again. There's some fragment of that still saved somewhere, so that's always something. She did look up the epilepsy medicine on a computer. That's also another thing of like, well, I hope at the very least, I hope you were, if you didn't have a VPN, I hope that at least you were in incognito mode or something like that. Who knows? So, I mean, but it does seem like she is smart enough to cover up her trails in many different regards. So she sets up to kill Sylvester, but when he's ready for showing up for their rendezvous, cops show up. It scares him off. He's like, crap, let me leave. And so now Elvira is being questioned by the cops, and they want to see her trunk because, hey, you're acting a little squirrely. Are you on drugs? Oh, are you drunk? She's like, I had a little bit of drink, but nothing too serious. So it's like, oh, do you mind showing me what's in her trunk? It's like, oh, yeah, all those tablets, all that lights, and a knife. Cool. So she was going to use the spray that she had used on Sylvester's dog when she broke into his house to switch out the medicine, that she was about to spray the officer, but she didn't notice that the officer had a partner. That's something you should have paid attention to immediately. I mean, I think generally speaking, I mean, I don't know what the code of conduct, not code of conduct, but what the procedure is for a lot of law enforcement around the world. I feel like more often than not, you're rarely going to be like, at least just, I mean, it also depends. I feel like more often than not, you will have a partner with you, but I guess it just depends. I mean, maybe that's just an assumption on my part because I've seen plenty of cops like by themselves, but I guess it really just depends on the circumstances. But it's like, yeah, you should have been wary of that because, like, yeah, what if you did knock out this officer? There's another one there to take you down. So luckily, you're able to be like, hey, no, I'm just, sometimes this trunk gets a little stuck, so you gotta, like, I'm spraying it to kind of loosen the lock a little bit. And before she could open it, she had heard the other officer be like, yo, Rose, we got to go. And she puts it together. It took me like rewinding it a little bit because when she started saying all that stuff, and I was like, is that supposed to be like a famous poem or something? Like, what is she referencing? And then when I rewound it and the officer said Rose, I was like, oh, right, Alice's daughter. I was like, how serendipitous. And for Rose to figure out, like, oh my God, you're the person who wrote my mom's obituary. It was very beautiful. It's like, oh yeah, your mom, she said all this about you, but she really loved you. It's like, yeah, she didn't really say it much, but it's like, yeah, she did love you. She did. Did she say those words? It's like, yeah, she did. So it was actually really sweet, and it gave. Obviously, they also had to deal with a domestic call. So Alice was like, all right, you go on ahead. Just make sure you get home safe. And she's like, hey, if I die, I want you to write my obituary because you did such a good job with my mom. So it's like, yeah, you got it. And for her, it's like, wow, that was too close for comfort. That's scary. I almost got caught. Like, I was too cocky. I'm like, no, I'm not doing this. No. She runs into the guy that took the tip from her early in the episode, and it's just kind of like, oh, it'd be so easy just to let him. It's like, nope, I'm not doing it. But then it turns out Sylvester dies. And because of her good work, that she's not going to get the pay bump or whatever. But the fact of the matter is that Huey's like, oh, you inspired me to be a journalist, and these rough circumstances will push you to be desperate. And what kind of work will you craft in the process? Because, yes, she decided not to go after Sylvester, but she forgot to switch back his medication. So, I mean, that's not 100% on you because he would forget to take it regardless. So, but at the very least, you can make the argument, well, he would have at least had some of it in his system leading up to his death instead of none at all. So him missing it maybe a day or two wouldn't have been as bad because, but to be fair, once again, he had that situation where I wouldn't put that 100% on you. I mean, you were planning on killing the guy, but I feel like that doesn't fully fall on you. But for her, it was just kind of the kick that she needed to be like, actually, I feel really good. I feel happy. I'm actually ready to do this. I'm ready to go. I think that I can do this. You know, she even said like, "Oh, you have no idea what you've kind of unleashed. At you're basically giving me permission to wild out. Giving me permission to kind of burn this town with a flamethrower of what I'm about to do and unleash." And so I also love that aesthetic thing that they have where when she looks at people, she sees their written obituary. It kind of makes me think of Shinigami Eyes in Death Note, where it's not a one-to-one, but if you're unfamiliar with Death Note, the creatures in that universe are known as Shinigami death gods, and they have special eyes that can tell how long someone has left to live. That's a plot relevant thing because it could also be given to humans as well, so that they can have Shinigami eyes to see how long someone lives. So it kind of, especially with her whole thing of initially being like, hey, I'm gonna find people who are close to death and write up a premature obituary for them and stuff like that. So there's a lot of interesting like parallels to the Shinigami when it comes to Elvira's circumstances. I don't think I finished I don't think I finished the whole conversation about Clive and Emerson, about why Emerson's really here. It's about, you know, Maria's death. I think I touched on it, but tying it into this, it is interesting to find out the last person that was seen with her was Mal. So I'm curious what that's about. Are we going to find out a situation where, I mean, she's going to go after bad people too. So she's probably going to end up either accidentally killing the person who was responsible. Well, because they said the most likely suspect was her husband, which that wasn't Sylvester was, and I don't think, because like once again, didn't he already have like a wife or something? Because that's who she was outside their house and everything when she switched out of medication. So not unless that's like a new woman in his life or something, a new wife, and that maybe Maria was his first wife. But they were talking about the husband. I wasn't paying as much attention to the last names like I should have, so I don't know if that's supposed to be Sylvester. So that puts Elvira in this very interesting spot because, hey, you might have killed a guy who might have been responsible, but I doubt that. It's probably like someone else in town. It's probably most likely the husband that is the most likely suspect. So is she going to end up killing him just because she thinks he's a suspect, but it turns out he's not? Because she's also, like I said, in that Dexter bag, but she also has to do her thorough homework, just like Dexter does, to make sure, hey, is this person actually guilty and stuff like that. I mean, it's not even just for, hey, well, it's the exact same thing of like, you've got something inside of you that helps fulfill that. Very much like Dexter, he had to feed that dark passenger, and Elvira's kind of in the same boat, but she also has the monetary value that's associated with it too, which wasn't the case for Dexter. So it adds a like even more messed up element to her circumstances, which doesn't justify Dexter, but it is that like anti-hero vigilanteism where you're like, okay, you can not justify it, but you can understand to some extent. It's like, well, you got a darkness in you, rather don't use it for good than evil. But in Elvira's case, it's like, well, I'm doing it somewhat for good, but I'm also getting paid to do it, so it makes it a little icky. So I don't know. Very, very interesting start to the series. I'm excited to ultimately see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.